Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
This week, Antony and I are going to talk about the wealth tax. Along the way, we're going to get into why your dog is so damn fat. No, I'm serious. We're going to do this. We're going to talk about genetically engineering mosquitoes, which sounds like science fiction, but would probably be a great idea. And U.S. debt donations. If you really want, you can donate to the federal government. All this and more on Words and Numbers, coming right up. Words and Numbers is a CiVL original podcast. You can find out more at CiVL.com. That's CiVL.com. What is new and exciting in your world this week?
Well, once again, I'm going to palm it off on one of our listeners, actually a friend of ours.
You suck so hard.
Brendan Eck, who posted something on the Words and Numbers Backstage Facebook group, which you should all join. Brendan says, well, actually, I don't have the quote, but the article he posted was an announcement from the Treasury Department that they are now accepting Venmo to, if you want to contribute to help to pay down the debt.
Yep. This is going to work exactly as well as how you can send more income tax in every year if you feel like it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it left me wondering, I contribute every April 15, and yet the debt gets worse year after year.
What do you think will happen if people start sending in trillions of dollars to pay down the debt?
Well, see, that's the interesting thing. Dollars are, the technical term is fungible, which means that they're all the same. How should I say this? Well, I'll give you the example. You can send money into this and you can think in your mind, well, this money's earmarked to pay down the debt, which indeed, I'm going to take it for given that it is. That's what they claim. So I send in, let's say, $100, and that goes to pay down the debt. And so now I can rest easy. The debt is $100 less than it was. But here's where the fungibility part comes in. With the debt $100 less, the politicians now are free and clear to spend $100 more than they would have otherwise.
Well, careful now, because I think we've decided over time that for every $100 that comes in, 123 gets spent.
Yeah, on average, if you look back historically, look at what happens to tax revenues over time as they go up, and then the following year, what happens to spending. And on average, for every time an extra dollar comes in, the next year, Congress ends up spending an extra $1.23.
Isn't that something? So yeah, go ahead. Venmo the United States government some money.
Yeah, well, the new piece is that you can Venmo the government to help pay down the debt. But this thing has existed for a while. There's a form, and the IRS, they're pretty smart. They've got a number for every form, the 1040 and the 1099 and what have you. They did not assign a number to this particular form. And as near as I could tell, it's the only form like it that doesn't have a number attached to it, which is kind of nice because it makes it feel more, cozy and warm. But the form is called Gifts to Reduce the Public Debt. That's the name of it.
Now tell us, and all those rich people who say we should tax rich people like me, how much are those people all as a group collectively, well, what the hell, along with all other Americans, sending in with that form every year?
Yes, very good. And here's where the numbers come in. How much do Americans actually contribute voluntarily to pay down the debt? This year, 2025, Treasury expects to collect $1.5 million.
Million with an M?
Million with an M.
Oh, my God.
I'm going to get to that in a moment. In 2024, it collected $2.7 million with an M.
Oh, my God.
1 million in 2023, and in 2022, that's at the height of inflation. Of course, everybody's pissed off about that. It collected $180,000.
And I know you're a math whiz, and I know you like doing calculations. How long can the federal government run on $180,000?
Let me help you out here.
You've already figured it out.
Oh, yes. This figure averages $2.5 million a year. So on average, Americans are donating $2.5 million a year to pay down the deficit. And someone's going to look at that and say, well, yes, maybe it's a little amount, but it's every single year, and that adds up because every little bit helps. No, 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 honey, it doesn't. $2.5 million a year relative to the federal debt is like donating 2 cents, 2 pennies, to pay down a $350,000 mortgage.
Well, every little bit helps.
So this thing collects virtually nothing.
$0.
I mean, the government spends this much money in a matter of seconds. Oh, in fact, yes, because I didn't write it down in my notes, but I did the calculation. If you write a check, by the time you're done writing the check, interest on the debt has already wiped out your $2.5 million.
Yeah, that's great. That's just great. And I just want to point out, as I always do when this comes up, that every single time you hear some rich person on TV saying we should tax the billionaires or the rich people like me, well, if you're so committed to that, send in some money.
Right,
But,
yes.
But what they really mean is we should tax all of you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they really mean. Because
Yes.
they never, ever put their money where their mouth is.
Anybody, rich, middle class, poor, who claims that they'd be willing to pay more taxes, help yourself. The name of the form is Gifts to Reduce the Public Debt. Go crazy.
Yep, and it's not going to happen any more next year than it did this year.
Yeah.
I have something that's actually quite uplifting. You know how
You?
I kind of... Shut up. You know how I kind of like, you know, look, I'm not scientifically trained at all, right? But I'm fascinated by the world of science. And an article crossed my gaze a couple of days ago, driving a protective allele of the mosquito FREP1 gene to combat malaria. Now, let me just unpack that for you for a brief second. Some people have figured out how to genetically alter mosquitoes so they can't carry malaria.
Really?
And wait till you hear this. That alteration continues through the rest of their bloodline for all time.
Wow. Wow.
We may see the end of malaria very soon. And just to be clear, malaria has killed more human beings than war. Indeed, malaria has killed more human beings than every other thing.
Yeah, that's why the mosquito is listed as the most dangerous animal to humans. By
Mosquitoes
far
is-
more humans are killed by malaria.
Mosquitoes are a serial killer of epic proportion. But it may be the case, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. You never know. But wow.
Yeah.
How about that? It's going to be almost impossible to segue to the foolishness of the week from what might be the best news ever for human beings.
It is good news, but something worries me in the back of my head that we're going to get to the point, and we're pretty close to it now, where we can just reach in and tweak genes on whatever organism we want to get whatever effect we want. And it sounds hauntingly familiar to me.
It is hauntingly familiar, Ant.
Of politicians reaching in and tweaking pieces of the economy. And it almost always has, where the economy is concerned, devastating effects because the politicians can't see the second, third, fourth degree outcomes that result from this. And so I wonder, okay, so we do this. What happens? Now, malaria isn't transmitted as much as it was before. What's the consequence of that? Maybe there's a good one. I don't know.
No, and nobody knows, and that's the point. We don't know. You have to be very, very humble when you think about things like this. So yeah, and look, you had asked me a couple of years back if I could eliminate one thing from the world, what would it be? And I was on top of that with mosquitoes within 1 second.
Yeah.
And then I said, but who the hell knows what unintended consequence would emerge if we got rid of all the mosquitoes. It doesn't seem like there'd be anything because there's nothing that feeds solely on mosquitoes, right? And every which way you push it, there doesn't seem to be a bad outcome. but that's the nature of unintended consequences. They don't seem to be there until they are.
Right. The way to find out what depends on the mosquito is get rid of them. And all of a sudden, oh my God. Yeah.
That's right. And look, you went to economics, shock of shocks, but I would have gone to eugenics. Right, because pretty soon we're going to be able to eliminate all the human characteristics we don't care for. And should we do that?
Right, yeah.
Should we? I mean, look, it's one thing when you say we can eliminate Down syndrome. And it's another thing when you say, oh, would you like green eyes for your baby? Right, and somewhere in between those two things, there's going to be a line, and that line is going to be very dangerous.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway.
It's funny you mentioned that because I'm thinking about what is the term psychopaths? That psychopaths, we think of them as being, the murderers, which they are, but they're also the top-notch CEOs.
Or CEOs,
Yeah.
That's right. They're quite good at it.
Sorry, there goes your good news.
Yeah, that's all right. That's typically how good news works anyway, so I'm not terribly concerned. For the foolishness of the weekend, I can't help myself but go to, I keep an eye on this website called Study Finds, but today the headline that caught my eye is that more than half of the dogs in the United States are overweight.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
Even beasts who run around unencumbered by the thought of any damn thing other than, oh boy, I like to do this, even they are overweight. And not only overweight, but half of them, now come to find out there are some breeds who are more susceptible than others, but I think we can all contend that this is an owner problem, because if a dog is overweight, that means a human being is giving it too much food.
Well, the human being is probably overweight by the numbers.
And that is absolutely correct, too. You're going to see remarkable correlation here. Remarkable. Causation? Hey, I don't know. Yeah, of course it's going to be causal. Of course it is. And there you go.
Get Words and Numbers on CiVL.com and on CiVL's TV and mobile apps. Regular episodes are free. Sign up for an annual membership to support our show and for access to member-exclusive content.
And on that happy note, Ant, we're going to talk about numbers and boring stuff now, as I recall.
Well, I want to talk about wealth, and what brought this up is, again, a discussion on Words and Numbers Backstage, where apparently it comes up every few years, but there's now discussion about replacing the income tax with a wealth tax, or maybe adding the wealth tax on, and of course people particularly politicians will get all bent out of shape about the number of millionaires and billionaires, and we should tax the wealth. And I wanted to talk about it, James, from two perspectives, and maybe the place to start is from your perspective, the philosophical perspective. What is the nature of wealth? What's the philosophical implications? Not the economic, but the philosophical implications of taxing wealth.
Well, there are philosophical implications of wealth more simply. We'll get to taxing it in a bit. But if you go back and really read the ancients, the concern, it wasn't about equality and inequality exactly. Those terms were largely unknown to those guys. But if you read your Aristotle carefully, what you're going to see is a concern with oligarchy, right? That some human beings are going to become much wealthier than others and much more influential than others, and they're going to look around and find each other, and they're going to come together and say, we can do a better job of ruling this place for us than whoever's ruling it now. And then you've got a problem. So, do I have a problem with wealth? Oh, absolutely not. Do most philosophers, professional philosophers, yes, but that's because they're liberal-leaning American-ish academics and, Western academics who are going to have a problem with anything like that. But, the serious thinkers over time, Marx notwithstanding, don't really have a problem with wealth, per se. They have a problem with starvation, right? People who are forced to do without when others have so much. So there's a delta there between two groups of people. that you can probably hang your hat on for a philosophical argument that would have some teeth. But the real philosophical argument, the one that never gets answered, is Aristotle's.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because that's the one argument that I found moving, the question of oligarchy. But people phrase it as this is clearly a problem, market failure, because free markets will produce billionaires, and that will lead to oligarchy. To which I respond, that's not a market failure; it's a government failure.
That's it. That's absolutely asinine. Elon Musk got rich from government contracts.
Well, that's one way to look at it. I wasn't going there. Let's suppose you've got a billionaire who became a billionaire through entirely market forces, no government intervention at all, and you say, well, he can now turn around and effectively buy off politicians to get favored status and all this sort of thing. To which I respond, okay, yeah, but the problem isn't the market. The problem is the politicians are for sale. It's a government problem, that your government is not treating everybody as if they are politically equal.
Well, or there's a certain market in government that you might not like to have.
Right, yeah. There's a market in government, which is a government failure.
There's a defective market, kind of like we talked about last week, right? The government, the market in human hearts would be a market we wouldn't want. Yeah. Well, a market in members of the House of Representatives, I'm not too keen on that either.
Yeah, well, exactly. But, to all these politicians who say we've got to do something about the billionaires because they can buy power, I say just don't pick up the phone when they call. Stop taking their money.
Yeah, oddly, the phone calls work in the other direction more often than not.
Yeah, I imagine so. But you mentioned something that I think people get hung up on, is mixing up inequality. We're not talking about inequality, we're talking about wealth, but you touched on it. Mixing up inequality and poverty. These are two very different things. And poverty absolutely is something we should be thinking about and concerned about. Inequality is a different animal, and I'm much less concerned about it.
There's a great thought experiment on this. I for the life of me, can't remember whose it was, so somebody will send me hate mail later. But imagine aliens come down and they walk up to you and they say, where we live, our standard of living is 1,000 times higher than here. Want to come with us? And you say, yeah. And they say, well, one stipulation. You're going to live half as well as we do. So you only live 500 times better than you do now. Is that fair? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd take that in a heartbeat.
Take that deal in a nanosecond, but go ask a bunch of 20-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And it becomes unfair somehow.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. These are sticky things, and the same arguments come and go and come and go. We never really solve them.
And I think there are two problems here. One I just write off as greed. That, look, if you're clearly better off and you're upset because somebody else is even more better off than you are, that's just greed. Call it what you want, but that's what it boils down to. The other thing that I run across,
I think it's envy.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, envy's a better thing. Envy. The other thing I run across is this sense that people seem to can't get over. They believe that wealth is fixed. Yeah. And so if this guy has more wealth, somehow I necessarily have less.
And I don't know how they can possibly believe this if they have homes to live in.
Right. If this were the case, if wealth were fixed, right now we should all be our wealth should be about 10% of what our great-grandparents' wealth was, because there's 10 times the number of us.
No, Ant. If wealth is fixed, we should have fewer stones than our parents did. Because we'd all be living in caves.
Right.
And there'd only be so many stones to go around.
Right, sure.
We wouldn't have homes at all if wealth were fixed in any way. So look around. The modern American city, for example, is utter proof that wealth is not fixed. The proof is right in front of you every time you walk out your door. Indeed, the proof is right in front of you when you sleep on a bed at night. These are not the natural condition of human beings.
Yeah, and I think what people don't get is, from an economic perspective, wealth is not dollars. It's the reorganization of material in such a way that the material is now more valuable than it was before. So you talk about rocks. Rocks are, they have some value. They're sitting there. But if I form them into a house and I carve them and they're beautiful, now all of a sudden they're worth a lot more. I've rearranged the material to make it more valuable. That's the creation of wealth.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it works all the time. Somebody looks around, sees something that others haven't yet seen, moves on it, builds with it, and either succeeds or fails.
Right.
Because you don't always succeed, right? You could do all this all day long and fail after a lifetime of trying, or any number of people that we could talk about who meet that description. But for every single thing you see that makes your life better, somebody stepped out on a limb and said, I'm going to make this thing, and people are going to love it.
Yeah, somebody stepped out on a limb. And here's another place where people go off the rail. They look at the billionaires. I'll pick on the billionaires, Musk and Sam Walton and Bill Gates and so forth. And they say, look at all the money they have. There's something not right about this. To which we reply, but they took on tremendous risk to get to where they are. To which someone will say, well, maybe they did, but look at all the billions they have. And my response is, you're seeing the world through a biased lens. You're only seeing the risk takers for whom the risk paid off. You aren't seeing the numerous risk takers who lost their shirts.
Let's put this a very strange way. I'm going to go out later and buy a lottery ticket. Now, lotteries are math, or it's a tax against people who are bad at math, but I'm bad at math. And I like to dream a little bit. Now, let's just say I win $250 million. Nobody will tell me I don't deserve that. Why not?
Oh, lots of people tell you.
No, they won't. They won't. They say you bought the ticket, you hit the number, good for you. There's something about working for it and achieving it over time in a way that doesn't involve such an obvious bit of luck.
I see.
That makes it so much more difficult. And I think envy is back into the picture again, because I think a bunch of people want what hard workers get, but don't do hard work.
Without doing the work, right. And they imagine, I guess it's easy to convince yourself, well, I could have done that work. Yeah. Except you didn't.
Yeah. And I think that really plays. I think, the human psychology is a problem. And it's one that we're never going to overcome. All of the evidence in the world won't matter as long as people have feelings.
Yeah, and as long as we're on the topic, let's go back to someone like a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs, who have the billions of dollars. And when we talk about wealth, and again, I'm thinking about wealth inequality, we only look at half the picture. We look at the dollars that these guys have. We're completely ignoring the fact that they got those dollars because we liked their products more than we liked the dollars. We gave them our dollars to get the iPhones, for example.
Yep.
But somehow, when we talk about wealth, we never count the iPhones. We only count the dollars. So, of course, your argument is necessarily going to be biased toward against the billionaire.
And when we talk about taxation, taxing income, although I'm on record as hating it, it's probably the most effective, fair way to tax a group of people.
Words and Numbers is part of the CiVL network. CiVL is a streaming platform dedicated to upgrading civilization by exploring better ways for people to organize, innovate, and thrive. At CiVL, we believe that societies flourish when their members honor the civic equality of all people and engage with one another through cooperation. CiVL seeks great minds from around the world to share bold ideas for fostering healthy, dynamic societies. By creating space for honest disagreement among people who share a commitment to building a better future, CiVL offers a refreshing alternative to divisive punditry and insular echo chambers. Words and Numbers is freely available, but those who subscribe to CiVL will access exclusive content, including regular live streams and conversations with remarkable people who are working to build a better society. For more information and to subscribe, visit civil.com. That's CIVL.com. Use the code Words and Numbers, that's one word, for 50% off an annual subscription. Tell me why.
Because you can zero in with rates on who can't afford it at all. You could say, okay, you get a 0% rate. And you could do that by giving them an exemption or just, there's a million different ways to play around with the numbers. And then you could look at the vast middle class and say, look, most of this is going to fall on your shoulders because there are more of you than there are of anybody else. And then you could look at the rich people and say, well, you're probably going to have to pay a little bit more. And that's just how life is. And they generally accept that. And it's easy because income is a number. It's a number that you get every year. And if you're not going to play around with forms and deductions, it's an easy number to understand. And I think we should just have flat tax and be done with it. We could all fill out our income tax on the back of a postage stamp, right? It'd be that easy. There are other ways to tax people, but when you get to things like taxing wealth, I'm not convinced you can do it.
Really? Why?
I think politicians will turn it into a punishment against the most productive members of society. They will take much more than they should have taken from those people, thereby making it impossible for those people to continue in business. You usually use the family farm as an example here when we get to this point in a conversation, and I'd like to hear you do it again.
Yeah, the family farm I usually hold out as an example of where you go so wrong with a wealth tax. And the story goes like this, and this applies to United States as we currently use the wealth tax. One of the major groups that it punishes are family farms, because the wealth tax is based on the book value of your wealth. I should say book value, the market value of your wealth. So, yeah, your assets. So if I'm a farmer and my family all work the farm, and I've got whatever I have, thousands of acres of machinery and all of that, if you add up the market value of my assets, I could well trigger the estate tax. And if I die, I have to give half of it or whatever it is to the federal government. There's all kinds of footnotes, but you get the idea. That's a wealth tax. They're taxing me on the wealth. But here's the thing. Just because on paper the farm is worth X millions of dollars doesn't mean I have X millions of dollars of cash. In fact, a lot of the family farmers don't have anywhere close to that. So the heirs, what do they have to do when it comes time for them to pay this wealth tax? They have to sell off pieces of the farm to raise the money to pay the tax.
If not the entirety of the farm.
Right, if not the entirety. And so over a couple of generations, the farm is gone.
And I would submit, Ant, that people have experience with something like this, but they don't think of it in exactly these terms. And I'm thinking about what happens to the family home in a divorce.
Right, sure.
Right? A lot of times, no one gets to keep it.
Right. Yeah, you got to sell it to raise the money to settle whatever it is. Yeah.
And, because the math doesn't add up any other way. That's a wealth tax.
Okay, so you oddly went down the economic route. I want to hit a philosophical problem I have with the wealth tax, which is that with a wealth tax, there is no place, there is no thing that is unequivocally mine. The way this works now is I earn some money and the government's going to tax some of that money. But what's left, that's mine. I can do with whatever I want. Now, if there's a wealth tax, all of a sudden that's no longer mine. It's sitting there in my bank, or maybe I buy a house and it's sitting there in the house or whatever it is, and the government comes along each year and says, well, you've got this much wealth, we're going to tax it. And over time it gets whittled away. Now, I argue philosophically, at that point, there is no such thing as private property anymore. Instead, I become like a serf. I can use the property until such time as the government decides that it wants it back.
Well, and I hate to burst your very optimistic bubble there, but we're already at the point where it's not ours, right? I own a home, or do I? If I don't pay my property tax, they'll take it away from me.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you bring that up, because I think there's a difference between state and local governments imposing property taxes, which they do, and a federal government imposing it. Because although I grant you absolutely that if I'm in a state or I'm in a locality that taxes wealth, I've got the same problem of, do I own this, really? But I have the ability to walk away. I could say, forget it, I'm leaving Virginia, I'm going to Arizona or Florida or somewhere where they don't have a property tax. But when the federal government imposes it, there's nowhere I can go. There's nothing. There's no place that I can take something that I have earned and move it off the table so that it is unequivocally mine.
Yeah, and look, with an income tax, if you're doing really well, you pay more. But if you have an off year, you pay less.
Mm-hmm.
On a wealth tax, nobody cares how you're doing.
Right, yeah.
You might be having the worst year of your life, but if you had 3 good years running up into it, now you're going to be taxed on your good fortune from 3 years back.
Right.
And boy, that doesn't sit well with me at all. Now, the real problem here isn't actually wealth, it's oligarchy.
Yep.
Let's be clear. How do you get around oligarchy? That's the question we should be asking. Why do you think none of our representatives in Congress use the word oligarch?
Because
pretty simple, straightforward answer. They are oligarchs.
Yeah.
At least enough of them are that they all know better than to walk down that line. So as usual, we have an obvious problem. We can all see it. We can define it from every direction. We know what works and what wouldn't, and yet not going to happen, because the problem is woven right into the nature of all things, not just economic things. Ain't that a kick in the pants?
Let me go back to numbers, because the way this is going to happen, if indeed it does happen, a federal wealth tax will come about in the same way that the federal income tax came about. Politicians will be on and on about it, and they'll be assuring us it's only going to be 1%.
Yep, the 1%.
It's only going to apply to the billionaires. And my warning to everybody who says that is, look back at the history of the income tax. That is exactly what they said about the income tax. And it took, not 10, it took 7 years after the institution of the income tax for the poor to be taxed on their income.
Right. That's right. Matter of fact, it seems like that took a little longer than I would have predicted.
Right, yeah, exactly. And so this is where I get very concerned, because again, people look at the billionaires, and I've got the numbers here for how much wealth the top, not the top 1%, but the top 1/10 of 1% own. They own $22 trillion of wealth. Out of, there's a total, the estimate, of course you can only estimate these things, the estimate is currently in the U.S., Americans own $160 trillion of wealth. So 22 trillion, or a little under 15%, is the top 1/10 of 1%. And so people are going to look at that and say, hey, look what we can do. If we tax that 22 trillion, my gosh, you can come not all the way, but 75% of the way to paying off the debt with that. That's a lot of money.
That's correct. And you could do it exactly one time and never again.
Words and Numbers is a CiVL original podcast. We work with CiVL to advance their mission of upgrading civilization by exploring ideas that promote civic equality and cooperation. We believe the most pressing issues humans face, war, poverty, debt, tribalism, arise from coercive institutions that bring out the worst in us. We at CiVL look to voluntary solutions to these and other problems. We invite you to explore CiVL's new platform at civil.com. That's CiVL.com. Well, you can only do it one time and never again because, yeah, you'll never get any, you've just ruined the incentive to become billionaires. But here, that's not where the politicians are going to start salivating. Where they're going to start salivating is not in the top 1/10%, but the top 10%. So now all of a sudden you're talking about 100 times the number of people, right? The top 10% own $58 trillion. Well more than double what the top 1/10%.
The same inclination that gets them going after the middle class all the time is going to have them going after that group.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm getting there. Because after we have taxed the top 10% and gotten their $58 trillion, politicians will then turn to everyone between the 50% and the 90%. So you're reaching straight down into the middle of the middle class. That group, $48 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
That group has, again, more than double what the top 1/10% have. And I claim that all these politicians that are promising we're only going to tax the billionaires, they've got their eye on the middle class. Individually, we don't have the wealth that the billionaires have, but we far outnumber them. So in total, the wealth we have outstrips what the billionaires have.
This is why the middle class always gets hit with the taxes, because that's the only place to hit for the taxes. Right. You know, look, anybody who was put in charge would do the same exact thing because it's literally the only thing to do. There aren't enough rich people, and the poor, you can't get anything from them. They're poor. But here's, and you're presenting kind of a straw man argument here. No politician's going to come and say, we're just going to confiscate all your wealth. What they're going to say is, we're going to confiscate a portion of your wealth. They won't even use the word confiscate. They'll use the word tax, and the word fairness will be thrown around. But over time, maybe over 7 years, sooner or later, middle-class retirement accounts are going to be on the table.
Middle-class retirement accounts, your mortgage is going to be on the table. What do you do if you've worked hard and you've paid off your house and there it is, it's worth, pick a number, $300,000, and the government comes along and says, okay, every year 5% of that you owe us. Where are you going to come up with that kind of money except by selling the house?
Selling the house. That's right. And that's a terrible, terrible place to be. If we're even thinking about doing that, everything is lost.
Yeah. And, you know, I take your point, James, that about the straw man. Nobody's saying we're going to confiscate all their wealth. Yeah, but I say they're not saying it yet. Because look back again to the income tax. Politicians promised us 1%, 2%. Somebody said 5% at the time it was being debated. He was laughed at. But nonetheless, those are the numbers they're talking about. And what happened? It was maybe 30 years, 40 years, and the top rate went to 92%.
Great.
Yeah.
What could motivate a man to do way more work than the thought of a 92% marginal tax rate? Yeah. Well,
so in any event, I would jump in here with a so what, and my so what here is look back to the source of the problem. The reason we're having this debate at all is because we have year after year of trillion-dollar deficits, and we've built up a $36 trillion, $37 trillion debt. And so we're looking for sources of revenue. But I'm claiming revenue isn't the problem. If you track the government's revenue over time, it rises at like 6% a year. The government does way better than the rest of us do.
It does better than most markets.
Yeah, the problem is government spending.
Yep.
If you're not going to get that under control, it doesn't matter how much wealth you confiscate. You're going to be right back where you started. You're just going to have everybody poor while you do it.
And you're going to spend $1.23 of every dollar you steal from everybody.
Right.
Because some things never change.
You know, in a lot of ways, I think you've drawn the analogy before, but I think it's apropos. In a lot of ways, we're dealing with the same problem that one deals with, for example, alcohol addiction. If you've got someone who's addicted to alcohol, the answer is not give them more alcohol. That might solve your problem in the very short run. In the long run, you've got a much bigger problem. The solution is you cut the guy off.
Well,
and that's exactly the problem here.
Careful, because I think that analogy is a good one. But for the most severe cases, and I think we are a severe case, the answer is not to stop giving alcohol.
Not cold turkey. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right.
Maybe we should, I don't know, cut spending a touch and do it again next year and the year after that and the year after that until we're into some kind of rational parity with expenditures and tax income.
Yeah, I think you're right, James. And I think you could do this in a reasonable fashion.
We've done this math before. We've done this math before.
What did we say? We said cut the budget 10% and then
15% for 6 years.
Hold it not 15% every single year, but just once.
Yeah, once.
Then hold it constant for 6-7 years, and then you can go back to increasing as long as you don't increase faster than the GDP. And I think something like that would work well. The problem is people then follow up with asking me, all right, well, what would you cut? To which I respond, no. That's a political question. What would you cut? That's why we have Congress. That's why we have votes. As an economist, I'm saying you need to cut.
Yeah.
Now, let the politicians figure out what they're going to do.
Yeah, good luck with that, because they're not going to cut a damn thing.
No, but it means we have lots more episodes that we can do into the future on exactly this problem.
That's right. Keep us going literally forever until one or both of us is no more. And on that happy note, and I take my leave of you this week and remind you, above all others, be nice to each other. You can do it.